Okay. So, Holly, look forward to seeing the interview with Rita Panahi on Sky News about the new hire of your gender affirmation senior advisor and the talk about the gender affirmation policy and the freedom of speech policy. I was really curious about how that was going to go. But it was cut off after like 5 minutes. It seems.
That was a really big, weird few hours. But yeah, she
Was
was
it, how
running.
long was it actually, that interview?
It was less than 5 minutes. I think she was running over on her previous segment, and I foolishly hadn't asked how long the slot would be, so I'd prepared quite elaborate answers. And then yeah, I think it just ran over, and we just got chopped off. So it wasn't very satisfying. But
Yeah, but I thought it was really important, so that's the reason why I'm really grateful that you've come along to do a little bit of an interview.
yeah, thanks.
Comment to
Really nice.
everybody that I'm not usually the standard of people who interview you, that I've seen interview you, but I'll give it a go.
No, I'm really happy to be able to talk about it in a bit more detail. I think
But
that would be good. Yeah.
go, because that's the goal. So look, so there's been a lot of media coverage on this. I was reading the draft policy in May, but I think you mentioned that they did a media release on this, or it was in the media. The draft come about June.
Yeah,
So
I don't think the uni did a media release, but I think someone saw it on their consultation website, and then various media sources just kind of kicked off about how stupid the policy was. So there was a bit
okay.
of a fuss at the time about like, what the hell is the uni doing?
Well, what was worrying about it at that time then? You know.
So at that time in the draft, there were quite a few things that were weird. I think three general categories. One was a sort of compelled speech type thing about pronouns. One was about single sex spaces, and one was about the university vetoing events.
Yeah.
So I'll just say a little bit more about each of those, but jump in if I'm unclear or if you want to ask anything. So there was a bit that said the gender identities of transgender members of the university community will be affirmed by university employees through the use of names, pronouns, and descriptors. So that is really strong language, right?
Yeah.
Will be affirmed.
Yeah.
So that was like, anyone that's interested in the kind of compelled speech, free speech issue is going to see that as a big red flag. Then on bathrooms, they had a bit sort of saying that people were welcome, I'm just trying to look up the exact words, encouraged and supported to choose bathroom facilities that most closely align with their gender identity. So, that sounds nice, but what it means is no one has single sex spaces on campus anymore.
Are singles, do they add unisex or all gender toilets, or did they remove single sex spaces?
No, so that's the thing. All the new builds on campus, including my own building, which is quite new, have three types of spaces. They have male, female, and then they have like gender neutral or all gender.
Yeah.
So there's already like extensive provisions across the university for gender neutral spaces, but this goes a step further. So in the draft policy, it's saying people should just choose which bathroom they want to use, and that's going to include male people choosing female bathrooms, not just being able to use gender neutral. So that was kind of worrying for anyone that cares about single sex
Yeah.
facilities on campus, right? And cares about the students who might really want single sex facilities.
Can I just stop you? Was there any research done on the negative impact of having males into single sex spaces? I mean, we've been talking about there's a new genre in Pornhub of people doing spy video cameras of males in female toilets, and then there's about what 158% increase of violence towards women when you have all gender toilets. Was any of that taken into account?
As far as I'm aware, no. I don't think that kind of question is on the university's radar at all. I think they just see this as an inclusive step towards trans and gender diverse students, and they don't even recognize the potential conflict of interest. I mean, the student union has been for the last several years doing a campaign of stalls for all, and I think they are, I should have checked this, but I think they are pushing for like all gender toilets as the norm, which would mean not even just having some opposite sex students using their own toilets, but just kind of not even having male female bathrooms at all anymore.
Do you get a feeling from the university students that this is across the board for all the students, or is this mainly from the Queer Student Association or the Student Union? I mean, when I looked at the comments underneath the YouTube Sky News put up with your interview a couple of nights ago, everyone's going, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, but then that's the Sky News audience, right? So
Okay.
it's just hard to know. I don't know how to answer that. I find out often anytime I get a piece placed in any media outlet, doesn't matter if it's kind of leftish or rightish, the comments are usually pretty supportive. So I guess I have the suspicion that even on campus, there's a lot of students who probably don't want this, and then there's a tiny, loud, angry minority pushing this ideology and claiming to speak on behalf of students as their representatives, but not really representing them. But I might be wrong about that. I haven't done the survey or.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was so what have we covered?
Yeah.
We've done bathrooms and pronouns, right? And then the third thing was events. And I think this was the thing that actually incensed the commentators the most. So they had done, again, I'll just make sure I get the wording right. It was justified on the basis of preventing harm, that when the university thought there would be some kind of risk of harm to the trans and gender diverse community, it could then refuse to allow public events or public discourse. And that's going to mean like inviting external speakers, allowing current members of staff to host events, to invite certain sorts of people, or to have it on certain sorts of topics. And I understood that, whether this is paranoid or not, to be like a policy intervention deliberately targeting my event in 2019 to discuss the births, deaths, and marriages change, sex self-ID, because at the time there was no real way of preventing that, but there was a big push by the student campaigners to get the event cancelled. So I thought they're probably building in the possibility.
What's the rationale of harm, though? Because what we've seen with like the massive university and overseas is that the threat of harm has actually been to the GC speakers as opposed to anybody on the other side.
Absolutely.
So what harm are they talking about?
So I think there's sort of two things going on. One is that maybe two different kind of ideas about what harm is are being operated with. And so if you use one of those, you're going to see harm on different sides. So I think our side of the debate tends to think of harm in largely physical terms, but we don't deny the possibility of psychological harm. Like, we believe in PTSD and psychological trauma and so on, right? We just want it to have some basis, I think. Whereas their side, I think, tend to have a very expansive concept of harm, including like emotional upset, or perhaps even being threatened or challenged in some way when it comes to your self-conception or your identity. So they use this much broader concept of harm to say that gender critical speakers harm trans students by making them feel invalid or like that they're not accepted or that they're not welcome because they're not believed.
And has this kind of point of view been put to the committee who put this together? And if so, was it challenged? Like, we're not here to validate your self-image. This is not what the world. This is not the world. The world doesn't do that for you. Once you go out into the workplace, they're not going to validate what you think about yourself.
No, absolutely not. I was again, I don't know exactly how these policies get made, and I was trying to find out because I had some interaction with some of the people higher up and involved in it. My impression from those conversations is that they basically take advice from the people most affected in making the policy. So it would have been trans and gender diverse students, and then of course they're just taking that all as it is, like, okay, we're harmed by hearing these things, so that's harm. But then they consult, right? So the policy goes up for consultation with the wider university community. And then it's my understanding that loads of that feedback from other staff members, lawyers, free speech experts, whatever, was that you can't just have this completely vague and diffuse concept of harm that can be a catch-all to let the university just like get rid of anything it wants to, or defer or pander to student sensitivities. So sorry, that was a long way to say I'm pretty sure they didn't really think of that in the draft policy, but they were forced to think about it a bit in the consultation, and so it should have been fixed. in the final version of the policy.
Well, we might look into these things a bit more detail, but one by one, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Because I've got a few things that I thought of when I was looking through this. I've got to say, I think I mentioned it before we started recording, that what I've noticed most about the gender affirmation policy is that it bears a lot in common with the policies for the primary and secondary schools.
Interesting.
And because the primary and secondary schools are also signed up to the AWEI, and this also bears, because we just got a whole bunch of FOI in from various government departments and corporates, etc., they're all reading pretty much the same.
Yeah, good. So maybe if we have any possible viewers who don't know what that is, we have.
I'll put it below. I'll put the links to these policies below, and I'll also we're going to put a kind of a spreadsheet together of those common policies with the with all the organisations signed up to the Australian Workplace Equality Index. I suppose I should say what it is.
Yes. Yes.
So ACON, which I say is primarily a trans lobby, has set up a Pride in franchise. It's got two major roles, ACON. One is it's been well known in the past for doing really excellent work around HIV, around when the pandemic hit, and brilliant work. But when the pandemic went down, very much like Stonewall, it sort of was like, what do we do now? And Stonewall had a bit of a chat with ACON, we do know, and we've got some great Pride and Diversity Championship audits and a Workplace Equality Index. Have a look at these, and I did have a look at what Stonewall had and what ACON did, and really they've just taken this and localised it for Australia, essentially. Right. And what they are is essentially ACON and Stonewall, who really wrote this stuff, has got a set of criteria that embeds gender identity ideology into the workplace or schools or universities. Criteria like single-sex spaces and pronouns and supporting transitioning, etc., etc. And it basically, when you sign up to it, you sign up to ticking those boxes, as it were, and you get rewarded by having a badge if you do very well. University of Melbourne's got a bronze badge.
Good on it.
And you get on a leaderboard, very much like as they've used gamification. So gamification always uses leaderboards, like they compete against each other. There's a leaderboard. So in other places like Sports Australia, for example, their Pride and Diversity, Pride and Sport audit, they specifically use, means that there is no hope in hell that you're not going to have males in female sports, because that's what they signed up to. So the Australian public doesn't really get a say on that.
I noticed that the University of Melbourne was like doing very well on the Pride and Sport. I think the University Union Sport, whatever it's called, UOM Sport, they had won, or they had the highest level of accreditation or something. So that's very interesting. So we can tell by the fact that these policies are similar across different schools and universities and institutions in Australia, that they're all kind of following this particular organisation.
Well, for rewards of having a badge and being on a leaderboard, and I kind of start feeling angry now.
But what does that, why is that appealing to them? Is it that prospective students and staff and whatever will want organisations and institutions that have that? Or is it, I mean, why?
I asked that question too because, and my background has been in doing things like training and change management in government schools and in corporate companies, particularly when I was going through some major changes like bringing in computers and software back in 1986 and the internet. Those were profoundly big shifts in culture, huge shifts in culture. And you would think it happens just like naturally. It doesn't. It really is orchestrated. And one of the tools of orchestration of embedding a change in culture is audits, the certifications, and saying, okay, we're going to make a change. We'll do some speeches. We're going to train your CEO and everybody down below about how wonderful this new change is. And we're going to put up banners and posters and, flags and all the rest of it. Same thing. And then we've also got these certifications, and you're going to get awards for the best ally and the awards for the best blah, blah, blah. It's just exactly the same. And you've got a change management process. When I looked at the handbook I say the handbook. I'm not talking about I'm talking about like how the laws are brought into place, like they're done in stealth and they're pushed through and a whole bunch of other stuff. I noticed that they actually followed a particular specific change management process, I say, called Cotter's 8-step change management process. Mm-hmm. Coming from that background, I recognise that and I recognise that. So this is kind of like, Kit was telling me, who also works in this space, you're saying in many ways, like when you're dealing with HR and administration, they're not really concerned about the social side of things. They're just concerned about the boxes they need to tick, the things that they need to approve. If the government says come and do this, or they're signed up to something, they just need to go and do this thing. That's the other stuff. That's everybody else's business. Our business is to make it happen.
Yeah.
So you've got like, that component.
It wouldn't be so bad if that stuff was just like a little bit expensive but inoffensive side nonsense. I guess the problem is that we definitely see this at UniMelb, and I think in other universities, that side nonsense clashes with core values of the university, like academic freedom, pursuit of truth, like the things that we're supposed to value above this kind of like ideological nonsense. And so I think that's why there's a culture war is too strong, but like that's why there's pushback, right?
It should be.
Yeah, there should be more than there is, in fact, but at least there's quite a lot in Australia, which is promising.
All right, so can we get into a bit more of the nitty gritty of this? I think.
Maybe it'll be useful. Sorry, maybe it'll be useful to talk about whether any of that terrible stuff got fixed or not in the real policy that they've just published.
I think that sounds pretty good. Did it?
Not really. I'm going to say not really. So bathrooms didn't change.
No.
Pronouns didn't change.
No.
The pronouns thing was actually quite sneaky because they made it seem like it changed by having it occur in 2 sections of the policy. I don't know if you caught this.
Yes.
So the first place where it occurred, it made it said something complicated like will respect. Oh, where is it? The university respects the right of individuals to choose their name, pronoun descriptors, and then staff and students are expected to respect their right. So that almost created some wiggle room, like, okay, if John wants to be Jill, then you can respect his right to do that. Yeah. But maybe that doesn't mean you have to call him Jill or call him she. Yeah. Certainly not behind his back when he's not even there to his colleagues. But then later down in the policy, there's this section on roles and responsibilities. And the final entry in that table is for all members of the university community. And you'll see the second item is use the pronouns, names, and descriptors that the person has stated they wish. And not only just with them, use those pronouns and names in interactions with their colleagues. So even when, what did I call him? Jim.
Even in the room.
He's at home, but you have to uphold this pretense that you think he's a woman when you talk about him to your colleague.
Well, firstly, is the names, say for example, Jim says he's Jane, does he first have to actually change his name by default, which I think would be fair?
No.
No, so it's just self-declared.
Absolutely, yes.
So I can call myself Jesus.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The university is making, like, it's part of the policy to make it easy, like to have someone to help facilitate these pathways for things like change of name. I mean, I'm almost sure that's correct. I should have.
If it's not, I'll put a note on it.
Yeah,
and link.
Good. But I'm almost certain because I think they are buying into the self-declaration model of gender identity, and they're following the Equal Opportunity Act, which absolutely does that. So it would be extremely surprising if they then said, no, you have to, for your name, you have to have it done by default, but for your pronouns, you can just choose them each day.
So I asked Kath Beeves before this interview, is it actually law? Do you have to, in Victoria, use people's self-declared pronouns? She said no.
No.
Unless it's some, it's and not even a bench book. It's not. So if it's not law, are you bound to do that? Because, so for example, I'm a religious person and gender, because these pronouns are based on an ideology that conflicts with my ideology.
Yeah.
and my gender expression as a Christian woman would be that I reject all that. I
Absolutely.
won't use it. Do I have a right, therefore, not to, therefore, do I have a right, therefore, to use the common use of pronouns, which is sex-based pronouns, which is a standard across the whole fucking country?
No, I don't think so. So I think how it works in the university case is that the law is the stronger requirement. So anything that's required in law, you have to do, otherwise you can be fired. But then the policy can set much tighter constraints, and you have to follow that too, or you're subject to inappropriate, the appropriate workplace behavior violation or whatever. So you can be subject to complaints and then sanctions. So it's now a part of policy that you have to use these pronouns and descriptors even when the person's not there. And you could then, so say you had a snitch colleague who was like, oh, she called John he.
Which you do have.
Which I do have. Then, or even maliciously, right, they could make that complaint, and then who knows what the sanctions would be. There's a range of sanctions for violating these kinds of policies, and it depends how they
there was no conversation about that dissonance that would happen, that you have to kind of see something that's not true to be the opposite of it. I mean, I'm a Star Trek fan, and one of my one of the scenes that really got me upset the most was when Patrick Stewart was hung up, and he was told that that there was 5 lights when there was only 4. Okay, and they were trying to get him to say 5 lights, and he refused because that was the way to break him. Yes. to then use him as to embed him into the company once he was indoctrinated. And isn't this the same?
I know, I think it's really bad. I mean, it's quite interesting because among progressive colleagues, anytime I sort of talk to people about this, they'll always say, oh, like, don't make that your issue. And I'm interested in what you think of that. I guess because it's like the person most associated with pronouns and compelled speech is Jordan Peterson. So if you jump on that bandwagon, you're immediately associating yourself with all the baggage of the Peterson empire. And then maybe the thought is like, which I'm sympathetic to this, that in your class, of course, if there's a male student and he says, I want to be referred to as she, her, and called Susie or whatever, and then you say, okay, John, like, that would be perceived in that context and by other students as really dismissive or exclusionary. So I understand that in one-to-one interactions, it would be very unusual to even want to just insist on using sex-based pronouns. Or
can you get around it by using their last name?
You could just use their names. You could use
last name.
Everyone. You could, so there's ways to get around it, but I think probably I'm sympathetic to this, and I know a lot of my colleagues are, that it probably just wouldn't happen. Like, you probably just wouldn't care in a classroom setting about insisting on that. Like, we can be militant in our own time. We don't need to be it in a way that might make a student feel shitty. So that's fine, but that's quite separate from, okay, and anytime you talk about him ever to anyone else on campus, you'd better uphold his conception of himself as a woman, when that's part of an ideology you absolutely do not believe in. And that's a workplace, that's an inappropriate behavior offense now. Like, that is, so I think it really does matter. Like you say, it's part of an indoctrination, and it's a power play, and you should be able to not do it.
Well, as the thing is, if we look at, as I mentioned, people are following this. They're following these policies that are based in AWEI, Australian Workplace Equality Index, set up by ACOM, which is a member of ILGA. And ILGA, Dentons, Thomas Reuters, etc., they put together what we call colloquially the Derwents Handbook, because all these things, working with startups, sometimes you're bringing some fantastic new idea into the marketplace, and you've got to put laws in place for you to sell your product. And you've also got to bring in some branding to that. So when I look at this from the perspective of a startup or a product development perspective, all I see is, well, okay, they needed to put some laws in place, and the branding is gender identity ideology. That's the branding. That's what they can sell. And so you basically, I've got to say, when you put things in place like you're supporting the pronouns, that's social transitioning. And then you're supporting, I'll go into this in a bit more depth, you're supporting the medical transitioning.
Mm.
You're basically really following something that was set up to promote the selling of products, the pharmaceutical products, which transitioning medically and transitioning people. So when I think about that, isn't the University of Melbourne just an extension of the trans lobby? Aren't you an extension?
I don't think they'll see things that way, and I think it's probably reasonable of them not to, just because there's so much misinformation around this, and the what we call the trans lobby, right?
Yeah.
They've done so well in obscuring what is really like a special interest ideological movement, and we can argue about exactly whose interests it's serving. I'm actually more skeptical about the pharmaceutical line than a lot of other people on our side are, but it's presented as a human rights movement.
Yeah,
and of course it's reasonable for the university to think, oh, the next frontier of human rights, gender diversity, trans inclusion, let's do everything we can, because they want to be at the cutting edge, right? They have a big new sexual harassment policy, and they've tried to introduce various things for Indigenous students. They see themselves as cutting edge, left, progressive, inclusive. So I think there's a sense in which we could go a bit easier on the individual institutions. They've been fed a lot of bullshit, and they're getting bad advice from the diversity and inclusion people, and they're just trying to sort of do their best, but they're making big mistakes. I think it sucks, but I don't think it's like malicious or conspiracy or.
But isn't there an assumption or an expectation from the public that the universities would actually analyze and research things that they jump onto?
I mean, not yes, from the academic side, yes. And in a way they should be grateful for me. They're not, but in a way they can say that they have a person critically assessing. They do, even though they don't want her, right? but I don't think it's true at all that they expect that on the administration side that there's kind of severe checks and balances. I think they probably just assume that they're always doing these progressive, correct things.
No, that's the thing though. Once it gets to the HR administration, it's pedestrian. All that other stuff has to do. They're just pushing the paper. They're just ticking the box. That's the culture.
But I don't think they would be expected to think, or that it probably has rarely happened before, that what they're pushing is actively harmful. Like they push bullshit. Like, remember, this was huge in the UK that everyone was doing implicit bias training, right? So there's all this training, and it was in its heyday. Everyone really believed in that. Oh, you can tap these two things on a keyboard and find out that you're secretly a racist, even though you have no actual racist beliefs. Oh, and then terrible, my white privilege or my class, whatever it is. Okay, that has been kind of pretty seriously debunked by now, but I don't think that the training programs were malicious, right? They believed in a kind of psychological science at the time, and they were trying to spread the good word. So I might be wrong, but my impression of those things is that they're like harmless bullshit most of the time, bad, lengthy training that wastes your time, but it's not doing harm. Whereas now it is.
But surely they must realize that removing if you're removing breasts or castrating people, you're going to have, and predominantly they are LGBT and autistic, then you are doing irreversible harm to a specific group of people.
But we know this. You and I know this because we've done how many years of research?
Not much. I only started this October last year.
Okay, well, I have been working on this for 4 years, okay, and I know about this stuff. I cannot, when I come face to face with an actual administrator, well, I'm not allowed to say, I have to get legal advice before I can say very much, so I'll just put this in the most abstract terms. I have come face to face with an administrator with quite a lot of power over this sort of thing in the university, who had not the least concept of what it even means to be trans, who was working with a 1960s understanding of trans as transsexual. She would have had absolutely no idea that, 16-year-old autistic lesbians are being subject to top surgery because they're being affirmed in their gender identities. No idea. And so, of course, I agree with you that it's horrible that stuff is happening, but do we blame the diversity and inclusion policy of universities, or do we blame ACON? Yes.
Yeah,
The Andrews
absolutely.
government for pushing
Yes.
through stupid legislation? Yes. Verioc for having an insane interpretation of the law on how gender identity and sex go together and just bringing ideology into their legal interpretations? Yes. Those guys are to blame, right? UniMelb.
No, I'm sorry, but that's one of the reasons I have a big issue with universities. And if you know me at all, you'll notice that I'm quite, quite critical of universities.
Yes, I have.
It's because of the lack of critical thinking.
For our viewers, the first time I met Kat, there was just a 5-minute rant against academics and universities before I had to say I actually work at a university. So yeah, familiar with that. So I take your point that these are kind of venerable institutions and they have a responsibility. They should be more critical. They shouldn't be pushing this kind of policy. I'm kind of disappointed in UniMelb in various ways that they haven't been more forward thinking about this, that they haven't protected me in the way that they could against things like what have happened to Kathleen Stock. But I just am reluctant to say that's where the blame is, because I think that there's a much bigger picture, right? And the blame is bigger and it's affecting institutions like UniMelb.
Yeah, but let's go on that point, because in their freedom of policy that they've got, they have stipulated you can't harass people, you can't bully people, you can't discriminate people, all the rest of it, otherwise you're going to be subject to complaints and all the rest of it. But I recall in April when there was a little bit of a march over there at UniMelb, okay, that there were women who were supporting a professor at the time, or senior lecturer at the time, who was not allowed to go on site, or was told not to go on site, it would be dangerous, and who were physically assaulted, they were harassed, they had megaphones in the air, they were followed, and all their information was documented in order for doxing, etc., etc. And to the outsider, I don't know what happened inside the university, but we haven't heard anything or seen anything done to those people who did that. And that to me was harmful. So I suppose from an outsider's perspective, I'm very skeptical of the university concerns, because it seems when we look at all the universities, the people who are pushing these gender identity ideologies are the universities. It seems to be something that they want to promote and push from an outsider's perspective, because where did this come from originally? If I look at, for example, I went and looked at all the pronouns, like the they, ze, zer, pers, blah, blah, blah. I traced everyone down. They came from gaming, from MMORPG gamings, RPG gamings, and they came from science fiction books.
Yeah.
We made these up when we were playing, Dungeons and Dragons. Literally, we made literally those ones that you can literally trace them all to there. So you've taken LARPing to outside of the gaming space into the real world space.
But why does that make it the university's fault?
Because it was the universities who put that together. It was a Pacific University and the Southern universities that put that 85 pronoun thing together. I'll stick a link to it, of all the Z, per, etc. And it appears that this gender identity ideology is primarily coming through the universities.
Yeah, okay.
And the humanities and all the rest of it. Am I wrong?
I'm not.
I'm biased. Is that just my bias?
I'm not going to deny that there's not segments of the university, like the gender studies programs or whatever, pushing the ideological bullshit. That's absolutely true. I've heard from students on my own campus that those programs are taught more in the way of religion or indoctrination than in the way of critical ideas that you get to explore and disagree with. So that's not false. But I still think once we look at the whole world, right, what everything that's happened, all the pieces, I don't even fully understand it all yet. The Yogyakarta principles, the various influences throughout all the bits of law everywhere, the way this is coming through all companies and corporations, not just universities. When you put all those puzzle pieces on the table, I just don't think it's that plausible that because of the bullshit gender studies, queer theory, criminology, sociology stuff, and because of stupidity in the diversity and inclusion bits of the uni, that it's like somehow uniquely or primarily the universities. That's
no, true. I'll give you that.
that's like, we can still complain about how bad the policies are, right? It's just like, this is a huge problem for a lot of different people. Can I say, what did you think in the guidelines? So the new policy introduces these guidelines on the appropriate exercise of freedom of speech, and they're kind of sneaky because part of what they've done is that thing about vetoing events. They've just pushed it out of the main policy into the guidelines, but they're still allowing it. But there was one line in there, which was, I think, supposed to be like reassuring to people like you and I. So I wonder what you thought of it. They say, the university supports and values informed and robust debate in an academic community which promotes diverse views. It is critical in a university environment that alternative points of view can be voiced openly, with integrity, and with respect for the rights of others.
I'm skeptical.
Okay, so that doesn't reassure you.
No, it doesn't, because I'm just looking for it now.
Item 2 in the guidelines.
Which one? The freedom?
If you're in the gender affirmation policy, then in section 4, policy at the bottom, there's a hyperlink to a PDF, and that's the guidelines.
Okay.
And it's 2 of those.
Look, what when I was looking at that earlier today, it still has that part about if there's harm. You know, if there's harm or risk or anything like that, they can stop
safety.
it.
Yeah,
safety. But that was the reason what they used over a Massey University in New Zealand. Yeah. And that's what they seem to be using everywhere else. So I'm skeptical that it's not just virtual signaling. It's just saying, oh, well, look, it just reminds me, when Kathleen Stock finally quit, and the university suddenly said, we're robustly supporting her and da-da-da and da-da. Well, you didn't. Sorry, language. You could have said that 3 years ago, and I would then take it that that's true. But you do it after she leaves? No.
Oh, well, bullshit. 3 weeks before, right?
3 weeks before. It's still bullshit.
They did it at a point where things were like undeniably awful. Like the university students are letting off smoke bombs and putting up horrible posters and stickers directly targeting her.
That's harassment. Did they go into the dorms and said, take down those turf posters, take down the stuff on the walls? Did they speak over the megaphones or whatever, or say this will not continue? Did
they sanction any student? As far as I know, no.
No.
But that complaint can definitely be made about Melbourne, right? Like what you said happened earlier this year. The Vice-Chancellor could very easily have issued a blanket statement, sending out an email, doing a press release to all students, just making absolutely clear what the university stands for and what it will not tolerate. And he did not. No, he did not. And and here's the thing, you had bad press about this all over, and yet there was no response from the university. So I'm coming from a very practical background. I don't care what you say. Your words have to model reality, and if they aren't modeling reality, they're not true. There is no track record of freedom of speech, I think. On that point about him not saying anything, you and I were chatting about this by email, I think yesterday or the day before, right?
Yeah.
The AWEI reporting form, I was absolutely shocked because you keep mentioning it to me and I never actually read it until like 2 days ago preparing for the Sky News. You just, things fall down the list, you mean to, and then you don't. Okay, I finally did. And then I was absolutely shocked because it was like they can deduce up to 25 points if there's negative press about an LGBT issue and the university is seen to not respond to it adequately. Yeah. So I actually thought that totally explains why the Vice-Chancellor will not make a statement against those students or will not clear my name in all of this reputational damage, because that would count as, or could be said to count as, them not adequately responding to the negative press. And if 25 points doesn't make any sense to someone listening, the context is that they get 5 points for having a dedicated gender affirmation policy and 3 points for having a grievance officer.
Yes.
So those things are huge. They're 6-figure salaries and policy that's been months in development.
Yeah.
And that's like only going to add up to 8 points out of a possible deduction of 25 for not dealing with the negative press correctly. So no wonder they're not speaking up for their gender critical members of staff.
And there's the other reason, because the AWEI has said that there has to be training from the very top all the way through the organization of gender identity ideology. And it's not training, it's more an indoctrination of gender ideology, that you have to not only spread it internally, but you've got to spread it externally. Earlier, late last year, I looked at the Pride in Sport audit that was for communities, and 18 out of the 18 requirements, 14 was about marketing and training. And we're talking about a audit that applies to the mum and dads that get the Saturday morning sports, hockey and footy for the kids. But they would have to call up corporates during the week, or during the middle of the half time, they had to speak about LGBTQIA and celebrate all the many LGBTQI days during the year. We're talking about mum and dad trying to get footy, and no one you've got a problem trying to get the water, delivered to everybody during halftime, let alone get on a speaker and talk about LGBTQIA.
And what is this obsession with LGBTQIA?
Look, that's why I say that this is where, because I come from a business background.
Yeah.
When I look at this, I'm looking, what's the money in this? There is just so much money in this.
But why is there? Because hardly any people are actually LGBTQIA. I know it's expensive.
Oh, excuse me, but it's what you do is when you've got you with the QTIA though, that's a hugely growing number. I mean, in 2016, there was only 1,249 people listed as transgender. Out of that, there was about roughly 350 people who said they were trans women, and roughly 350 or so who said they were trans men in the whole of Australia.
Yeah.
The 1,240, and the rest didn't know the fuck what they were. Yeah. But now you've the umbrella of the LGBTQIA. It includes minor attracted persons, which is the new word for pedophiles.
Well, that's controversial whether it includes that or not. Highly controversial.
Well, given that ACON's part of ILGA, and ILGA lost its ECOSOC status from the United Nations from being affiliated with PI, Pedophile Information Exchange, and NAMBLA, North American Man-Boy Love Association, and in March this year, is still pushed for the lowering of the sex age for minors. And I'm sorry, no, there is a strong pedophile streak throughout all of this. There really is.
Yeah, I mean, one can certainly argue that. I'm just saying I doubt very much that ACON would say that they want anything to do with that.
No, they wouldn't. That'd be stupid marketing.
I'm just saying we can probably make the criticism, or we can talk about how expansionist the T and the Q categories are and what that will do for the LGBTQ without relying on the link, which is at least highly controversial.
Yeah, true. But still, it is. It's expanded. I mean, look, really, queer people, when I think of queer people, aren't they primarily heterosexual people who've got blue hair?
Yes, they are. Well, I saw such a good one on Twitter the other week. I'm not even sure if it was true, but someone said that she was queer because she was tall. So it's a kind of way of being gender diverse, because it's unusual for a woman to be tall. So she was queer. It's so funny. So that's interesting though, because I haven't really thought about this. It's the idea that LGBTQ can become like the fashionable minority because everyone can be in it, and then it becomes huge. Or is it that we somehow get all the non-LGBTQI people to just like really feel great about how much they're allies, and I haven't quite got my head around why people are so on board with it, or what is it like? Because it's a rainbow and that seems fun. It seems
like I personally feel that what's lacking a lot is community. And more so, originally, I was on the net ages ago. I was very much a first adopter of everything, internet, everything, computers. I took off from the training company and told my boss, the internet's here, I'm going to start a company. and he said, hold on a month and I'll come with you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But and we did have a huge community, but once you get the corporate coming in, that community went out the door, and it's now very much subscribed. We need to, I noticed the time's going on. I do want to cover a few things and then we'll close it off. We could go on forever on this topic. I mean, I just got to have a go. They've got down here in in the whole of the policy, I see nothing about homosexuals, lesbians, gays, bisexuals at all.
Oh, it's not about that though. So if you thought there would be something about that, there would be a separate policy.
Is there a separate policy?
No, I don't think so. But they can still say this is the trans policy, right? Like, so you wouldn't expect to see that.
No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. Agender is one of the definitions. Agender may refer to someone who has no gender. No gender.
Yeah.
Agender people may also be transgender. So you have no gender, but you can be transgender.
That's great. That actually catches all the turfs, doesn't it? No gender. All the feminists.
Non-binary, gender queer, or another gender label.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I should try this actually. Maybe I can get some sort of like protection under this policy to do something stupid and then claim that I have no gender on feminist grounds.
Do it. Have a look at anything else that was like highly offensive.
I mean, there's a stupid line, which is that they define trans and gender diverse as people whose gender identity is different to that which was legally assigned to them at birth.
Yeah.
Which implies you legally assign a gender identity to a baby.
No.
Which we don't. So again, that's like very clear sign of the ideological nonsense that they've really bought.
I know. I went and had a look at my birth certificate because I had to get it because I was thinking about becoming an Australian citizen.
Yeah, good.
And it does, and wasn't legally assigned a female at birth. I was just
sex, female, gender identity, presumably feminine, but let's see. Fucking hell. Yeah.
But it was like, I was just actually thinking about that. I was thinking it was very, they usually seem to tie the all this transgender movement also to the BLM, all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking, well, I usually have a go at people when they have a go at me because I'll use my colour as a weapon. I use anything as a weapon. And, they'll say you're short hair, so, you're gender non-conforming. But I said, yes, but Maori women have short hair, Maori men have long hair. Mm-hmm. So, am I gender conforming? I don't know.
Intersectionally gender conforming and non-intersectionally not. We need a new policy to combine all the policies to be truly progressive.
All right. Look, I think we've covered the key things, I think, on it. No.
Probably true.
I think so. So moving forward, just I want to ask this before we go. How's this going to impact you?
I don't know. Hopefully not. I mean, I can imagine, I think the biggest...
You've got some people who are nasty over there.
Yeah, but lots of people have nasty assholes at their workplace, right? Like just...
Yeah, but they seem to be very aggressive, nasty assholes.
Yeah, I actually think... are you a Harry Potter literate? Well, I think that the new gender advisor is like the Dolores Umbridge of the University of Melbourne, because I'm really like, that's the person where I think that person is going to be like insidiously working to, encouraging complaints and trying to change the systems. I mean, it's in the job description that they're going to like try to change the systems and processes to make them more inclusive according to this nonsense ideology. So I think if there's any kind of threat coming up, it's going to be from Dolores.
Well, remember Dolores worked for the commission.
Yeah.
And you've set up the commission.
Yeah.
And I did a video which will sound to anybody who's not in this as being like one of those conspiracy theorists, and I don't care. I'm happy to argue.
When you say you mean the Victorian state government with the...
Yeah, so the Victorian state government set up with the long-winded name of the gender...
Change or suppression practices prohibition bill.
Yes, thank you. Because they wouldn't do the conversion ban because they had to talk to religious people and they didn't like that being used, whatever. But they set up the commission to basically be act as, take all the complaints and say what needs to be done about it and execute punishment. And I say, because I'm like this, that you've got, it's because the definition of terms of sexual orientation and gender identity are so circular and so vague and nebulous.
Yeah.
You'd want it that way if you want to exercise more power. And if you've got a commission or any kind of body that can exercise more power, it will. I spent a lot of time when I was younger, in the early days, as the BDM and account manager for Premier's department and also the major government departments. And one thing I learnt is it is a political it's all about power. It's all about making little pockets of power and who can be more powerful on each other and covering each other's ass and things like that. I got out of government as soon as I could because I'd rather deal with corporate, because corporate has to be smarter, sharper, faster in order to make things work. And I like working like that because you could talk about making things smarter, sharper, faster, as opposed to the other thing, you're just making things conform. So my major concern about this is that yes, it is a Dolores, and it is part of a bigger picture of embedding gender identity ideology across Australia, because this AWEI is across the schools, across the universities, across all government and corporate, and coming also from tech. In the early days, when we, the tech community, wanted to embed computers, etc., into schools and your particular brand, Apple, for example, made sure all the schools had Apple computers because they knew that when the kids got into adult positions, they'll be using Apple computers. You've got an ideology that's been pushed through schools and universities, and you're embedding it into all of Australia culture, whether you like it or not. And we've had no major discussion about this at all. It's just happening.
Yeah. I mean,
so that's my concern.
I share your concern, but I'm also kind of optimistic just watching what's happening in the UK. Like they have Stonewall, we have Acon, like they have the same problem, we have that problem. They are managing to really push back against it and get Stonewall out of their organizations and institutions. It's happening slowly, but it is happening.
We're doing what we can for
exactly
that.
And maybe we're a bit behind them. I think maybe 2 years behind them, but I think we can do the same thing here. So I don't think it's like doomsday hypothesis, right? It's just like it's going to take a lot.
I think you're optimistic, Hobby. I'm not.
Maybe, yeah, but I am.
Okay. Alrighty, thank you very much for this talk. I think it's great.
Yeah.
All right, and I'm no less worried.